We'll go ahead and kick it off here with a short presentation. And I encourage anyone at any point in time, go ahead and ask any questions. We have moderators throughout our chat and a great community that joins our sessions in order to okay. We have a great community involved inside of our chat to answer any of those questions, as well as anything can be passed to me, and we might be able to get to answer some of those questions live. So I've encouraged asking any questions. So let's head over to the presentation. Starting off, I want to cover some of the basics. What is Capex versus OpEx? In the industry, Capex is something more tangible that you have, that you've paid for, that you own. Something like an office building, equipment, servers, racks, all of the property and equipment involved with that service is something that you own versus an operational expense, saying like a pay as you go infrastructure, as in you rent maintenance or repair or software as a service, platform as a service. All of these as a service are more towards the OpEx side of the infrastructure. And we're seeing a huge trend changing from one side to the other because of the convenience and how it allows even small businesses to large businesses run more efficiently and not have to worry about aging and legacy equipment. Whenever you own a building, you have to keep up with, say, the roof or the plumbing or the electricity needs to be updated. You're responsible for that. If you rent a building, then you are 100% responsible for staffing that building, but you may have a maintenance staff that you pay for all of those operational expenses that come through. Taking a look, industry Gartner. Gartner is a company that goes out and does surveys of all sorts of sides of technical communities, and they feed back to the community all kinds of results that have happened or trends that are happening so that you can keep up. And we're seeing a huge shift in the market and operational expense to capital expense. So operational expense again is exploding because of those software as a service platforms. We're seeing anywhere from 70 to 75% and continuing to increase in the market. When it comes to the Microsoft offerings, a large portion of that is software as a service, so Microsoft Office 365. And for who's responsible for what side of that data and the capital expenditure, we come to what's called the responsibility model. The responsibility model is something developed, or the shared responsibility model in this case is something that's developed by Microsoft to allow their customers to know what portion of the data in this operational expense infrastructure that you're responsible for versus what they're responsible for. As you can see in the software as a service category, they're responsible for the physical infrastructure, the data centers, the network, and the authentication servers that any of your users would authenticate with. But any type of integrity of that data or the information itself and saving it for archival purposes does fall on the end of the customer. And with that, you want to look towards an operational style platform for your SaaS offering so that you're protected all the way around still, and you know your data is protected. And that's where we come to Microsoft Office 365. Microsoft Office 365, or excuse me, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 offers a very versatile platform that allows you to use all sorts of operational expenditure, or excuse me, yeah, operational expenditure types of platforms. So we can go from the cloud infrastructure to an object storage and then be able to recover that wherever you need to recover. Looking at some of the options that Veeam Backup for Office 365 offers is, for one, and the new one, is object storage, which is direct backup to object storage, meaning you don't have to save that data on premise and you can save it there. Sorry. Direct backup to object storage offers an infinitely expandable storage for you to be able to store those backups to without having to worry about continuous capital expenditure for a local storage and the overhead of having to expand those storages. We also are able to use backup as a service with a lot of our Veeam Backup certified service providers, which offer a completely hands off style experience where you're not responsible for where the data is going. You're not responsible for the backup cycles, but you pay someone else to be able to do that for you. So you don't have to worry about the upfront capital expenditure on premise and you pay for what you use. You can also deploy Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 as an instance in many cloud platforms. We run on anything that's a version of Windows operating system supported. And then you can send any of that data to an object storage to help with the efficiency of cost in the operational expense platform. So taking a look at a VBO server fully configured for an OpEx style configuration, we can have an instance of Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 on a complete cloud instance, as we see here. And it's pulling from the Microsoft Office 365 environment. So if you do choose to deploy your instance in Azure, you're directly pulling from the Azure infrastructure to an additional Microsoft infrastructure. And then you can send that data, if you choose to, that same platform with Microsoft Azure Blob, or you can move over to an Amazon, IBM, or anything that is an S3 compatible storage type. It does have a small cache that it saves on the machine or a local repository. This is to optimize any type of restore processes and keeps a metadata of the files that are being sent up to the cloud, so it's easier to pull those back down. Whenever you're using this kind of platform, you're not losing any of the restore capability. You can restore multiple different types of data, whether it's your Exchange, your SharePoint, your OneDrive. You can pull it back down from the cloud and put it back on premises, or you can send it through an email to another user or yourself so you don't have to worry about transferring that data to additional sites. With Veeam Backup for Office 365, it's not just as important to have an OpEx model that allows you to back up your data, but we offer over 25 different ways to be able to restore that data. We talk so much about how to back up the data, where to back up the data, what, but the question often gets missed is, can you recover it? And can you recover it where you want it and when you want it in the way that you want it? And that's really what drives the Veeam Backup for Office 365 infrastructure, because we can support a fully OpEx type of deployment, but also give you the flexibility to restore your data in any way that you see fit. And actually, we can go ahead and take a look at some of the OpEx offerings over here on a demo. And just to start off, if you're wanting to back up for Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 directly through the cloud on an instance, you can go directly to the Azure Marketplace, type in Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365, and it'll be an option directly there for you to click on, and you can get it right away and start testing the product and see how it can work for you. And of course, we have the latest versions, which will allow you to move over to the object storage instead of having to use local disk in Azure. And it's really easy to get it added in. If I can type my password right. So this is the Veeam Backup from Microsoft Office 365 interface. To add in a repository, we can come down to backup infrastructure and we just go ahead and select add repository. And this is just going to be an object storage. And this path is that local cache that we were talking about earlier. And you can save that either on a separate disk from the machine if you're in an Azure environment. Keep in mind that these backup files are much like a database structure, so use a database type or a disk type that supports database style infrastructures. I always recommend encrypting your backups because you are sending these off of your local and you're sending them outside of Azure in some cases. You want to make sure this data is in fact encrypted on the storage. So we'll continue here. And finish. And that's all you need to do to add in an object storage. So it's very easy. There's no complexity to this. Creating a job from there is just defining whatever scope that you would like to try out. And that is also extremely flexible. You can go based on users, groups, sites, and you can back up your entire organization, but tell it that you only want to back up, say, email or OneDrive or SharePoint, which it looks like it doesn't want to let me in on this one. I do already have a completely configured server over here, which we can definitely take a look at some of those jobs and configurations. So this one is a job that just happens to be going to Amazon. And we're able to select what user you want. And of course, whether it's Mailbox, OneDrive, or SharePoint. Now, another great part of using object storage is to be able to keep up with the volatility of, say, your OneDrive and SharePoint data. Whenever we were dealing with just maybe email, you are limited to that usually 10 meg file, which means the backup size were pretty static, and you could make a decent prediction on how big that data would grow over time. But whenever we switched over to using and adopting more OneDrive and SharePoint online, we started uploading larger files, videos, and collaborative data for all kinds of teams and networks, not just internally, but SharePoint offers the ability to have public facing sites or limited public facing sites so that you're able to collaborate with other companies on projects and share data. So these data platforms are infinitely expanding, meaning that you would always have to be concerned bringing everything back on premises to have a capital expenditure for all of those disks for data that is so volatile today. So this is another great reason why object storage is, in my opinion, the best way to go, especially if you're backing up those types of data sources from OneDrive and SharePoint. And there's everything else from the job and from the restore. We talked about how important it was to be able to restore as well as it is to back up. We offer 3 different restore explorers. The Veeam Explorer for Exchange, Veeam Explorer for SharePoint Online, and Veeam Explorer for Microsoft OneDrive. Looking through each of these explorers as they pop up, we try to make them have all the same look and feel. So as you see, the only differences through the file structures are that since we are working with Exchange, we have a database and the mailboxes that are being backed up from that database, including shared mailboxes. And then with SharePoint, we have our organization with all of these subsites, not only personal sites, but say shared sites. And with OneDrive data, we have all of our users and a very familiar Windows File Explorer type of structure. You're able to restore either back to the original location or you can restore to new locations. it won't matter. So if we look here, I do have this drive mapped locally. So we can do anything from deleting a file here and it'll disappear from online within seconds to being able to restore it directly from this console and overwrite the original location with just the entering of our password. And of course, a slight sync cycle because we're not directly online. And we can come back here. So far, do we have any questions from the community or questions on the OpEx versus Capex conversation? All right. Since we have a small pause here, I'd like to go ahead and give a shout out to Veeam On that is coming here in June. It's a completely free event. June 17th and 18th, I'll be having a session there with Edward Watson and Achana from IDC to give some industry standard metrics on what we're seeing within the infrastructure. And we'll have many other great sessions. I have started a new type of session this year. We'll be looking for what's called the Veeam-a-thon. It's going to be a tech fest style with engineers live demonstration of diagnostic and troubleshooting of Veeam products. This is also included all in the live event. VSS control error with Office 365. It could be due to, I think this question was from James. Open files might cause a processing problem, but there are file versions that are being saved simultaneously as you're updating files within OneDrive and SharePoint. So you should be able to get versioning of that file, but if a document is open, it's unable to be accessed because it does have a lock on that specific version. So when you're I have another question from Lucas. Whenever you're implementing Veeam backup and replication in Azure, I recommend sending your data to an Azure blob storage because they are within the same infrastructure. And this will give you the most optimal operational expense that you can have because if you're getting a disk from Azure that is going to be powerful enough to handle all of that data in size and in IOPS, you're going to spend a lot more money than if you use a object storage to push that data off to and have a small metadata for your local storage. I think I got muted by someone. Echo. There it goes. Hold on. There we go. Sorry about that. It looks like I may have got unmuted and I started hearing myself echo and I can't talk over myself. So that's how I'd recommend optimizing the Azure deployment is spending the money on the higher end disk for your local metadata and sending the larger portion of your data out to an object storage, which would be much cheaper in the long run than saving it on an expensive data processing disk. And And it looks like we have another question from Delino. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Which are the best practices? Example, OneDrive for LaRose, separate email. I think you're asking how is it best to separate out your infrastructure? I've worked with a several different types of deployments. I always recommend separating out your OneDrive, SharePoint, and Exchange data, even if they are different folders on the same machine to start with, as I have here. You can see I have an Exchange repository, a OneDrive repository, and a SharePoint, so I could easily move that data off if there is any unexpected explosion in those types of emails. I've also seen organizations split off based on, say, HR, IT, and finance on separate repositories because you could send them to separate object storage, making it a lot easier to build each department based on the amount of storage that they're using when you know which storage unit to get that expenditure from. It looks like another question here. And it looks like it's from Farcell, asking about the AWS. So we can deploy Veeam Backup and replication software on any server that is Microsoft Windows, I think 2016, 2012 or 2 and newer, which means you could deploy an instance in Azure, or excuse me, AWS, install backup and Veeam backup and replication, excuse me, Veeam backup for Microsoft Office 365, and then send it to maybe an AWS storage. You can even use the infrequent access tier on AWS to send that data out to, if you would like to move your data over to AWS. And we have another question from Jamie here. Can you spin up a Veeam backup server in Azure and attach blob storage as a disk to restore VMs from the blob to a new VM in Azure? So we're moving away from the conversation of, it looks like, Veeam Backup for Office 365, and we're looking at Veeam Backup for Azure. Veeam Backup for Azure, you can import any of the object storage that your Azure is being sent to and import it into a backup and replication console under what's called an external repository. And these external repositories can reach out and read anything that's on that side to be able to restore it if you need to from another location. So you can import those blob storage into Veeam Backup and Replication with the external repository setting in Veeam Backup and Replication. And again, a lot of these types of conversations, especially around the Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure, are going to be highlighted at VeeamON that's coming up here in June 17th and 18th. Don't miss out. It's a completely free event. You can go to that link right now and be able to sign up. I also want to give, oh, it looks like we have one more question from Lucas. What it would be the correct approach where I have an on-prem Veeam proxy? Does it make sense to rehost them in the cloud, or would it be better to use a Veeam proxy on the marketplace? Now, I assume we're back to the Veeam backup for Microsoft Office 365 conversation. It's really a question on where you want your data to be kept, and do you want to move to an entirely OpEx style of infrastructure? If you want to keep your backups on premises for now, or if they're going to be sent back down to on premises, you might as well keep those machines there as close to where your data is. So, to answer your question, your proxy should be as close to where your data is being sent. If you're sending it to object storage, it might be worth looking into sending your Veeam Backup Microsoft Office 365 server and any additional proxies that you plan to deploy up to the Azure environment. I think that was And again, a lot of these types of conversations about where the industry is moving and what products we're going to be offering and what's coming new with Veeam is going to be presented live at Veeam on the 17th and 18th. I recommend anyone that has time to go ahead and click this link on the screen and go register so that so you get a reminder letting you know that these sessions are coming up. And again, they're completely free, a completely free Veeam on event. And I'd also like to turn the attention over to our industry insights team with Dave Russells and Jason Buffington. That's going to be happening this Monday. They're going to cover how digital transformation matters to business, whether it's the expenditures and cost or what types of services that you can offer to your customer. This entire digital transformation is going to be covered Monday. I'd like to thank everyone for coming and joining this session, asking all of these questions. It was great to see all of this feedback, and thank you.